I believe I have found the video.
Wow, you could.
Say hi.
Hi. Welcome to Debbie's tote bag tutorial. First thing you want to do is iron your muslin so that you remove all the wrinkles, because you want it to be nice and flat. Gather all the tools that you're going to need for cutting out your tote bag. You're going to want a pair of scissors, measuring tape, a gridded ruler, pins of some kind, pencil, tracing wheel, some tracing or transfer paper, and tracing board. Next, you want to lay your pattern on top of the two pieces of muslin, and you want it to be, you want to allow yourself at least an inch around the sides and bottom and at least 2 inches at the top. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make sure that this pattern is on the straight of grain of the fabric. And the way that we do that is by measuring from this arrow, straight of grain arrow, to the selvage edge. So what I'm going to do first is pin the arrow, pin through the arrow, through the pattern, through the layers of the fabric, and I'm going to measure with the measuring tape from the arrow to the selvage edge. And right here I have 10 3/4 inches. So I want this end of my arrow to be also 10 3/4 inches from the selvage edge. And if it's not at that, I'm going to pivot the pattern until it is at 10 3/4, and then I'm going to pin, stabbing through the pattern, through the fabric into the table. So now that you have the pattern on the straight of the grain of the fabric, you're going to pin the pattern through the two layers of muslin all the way around the perimeter of the pattern. And what you're going to do is smooth the pattern so there's no wrinkles or bubbles, and you're going to stick the pin into the pattern through the two layers of muslin, in through all layers and out through all layers, by putting your finger, pointer finger, in front of the pin and pushing it through all the layers. And you're going to do that about every 3 inches all the way around the perimeter of the pattern. So you can see that what I'm doing is I'm not lifting up the fabric so much, I'm letting the pin lift everything up as I'm pushing it through, and using my finger in front to help it go through. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to trace around the perimeter of the pattern, marking our stitching line or the seam line. We're going to do that using a ruler to keep our edges straight. I'm going to line up the edge of the ruler with the edge of the paper pattern and draw my pencil line all the way around the entire perimeter of the pattern. This is a gridded ruler, so each of these tiny squares is 1/8 of an inch. To find 5/8 of an inch, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your 5/8 inch line. Now we're going to measure out our seam allowances. So the seam allowance is the area between the stitching line and the cutting line. So we're really going to be marking our cutting lines, and we're going to use the gridded ruler to help us do that. We're laying the gridded ruler on the 5/8 inch line along the pattern edge and drawing our cut line. We're going to do that all the way around the bottom, the indentations, the sides at 5/8 of an inch. Along the top edge of the pattern, you want to measure out 1.5 inches from the top edge of the pattern and draw your line at the top of the gridded ruler. To find 1.5 inches on the gridded ruler, you're going to count these larger squares. This is a 1/2 inch, an inch, and an 1.5 inches. So this is the line that you want to line up on the edge of your pattern to find your 1.5 inches, like this. Now you're ready to cut out the muslin along the outer line that you've drawn, the cut line. So I'm going to start doing that, cutting right along that line. And I'm cutting with my scissors, the bottom of my scissors resting on the table as I'm cutting. Now you're going to transfer your stitching lines to the opposite side of the muslin. And you're going to do that with a tracing board and a tracing wheel. Pushing the wheel away from you, you're going to be rolling it right along the edge of the pattern, all the way around the pattern. Doing this will mark a blue or red line to your opposite side. You're also going to trace the straight of grain line through to the other side, as well as the pocket placement. So that comes through to the other side. If you're going to want 2 pockets on your bag on the outside, you're also going to want to trace through the pocket line onto the top side of the muslin. So you're going to do that by moving your pins and pinning through all the layers, and then sliding some tracing paper, this time we're using red, between the pattern layer and the top side of the muslin. And then with your tracing wheel, you're going to trace along the pocket placement line. With the pins in the center, nothing's going to shift. I'm taking out the rest of the pins so I can mark the top side of the pocket. Now that you're marked and cut, you can take the pattern off the muslin. Take all the pins out. Now we're ready to do some of the sewing.
Go ahead.
Next, you're going to overlock the bottom edge, only the bottom edge of the muslin. And you're going to remember to line up the edge of the muslin with the edge of this plate. Anything over that edge is going to get cut off. And you don't want to do that. So keeping that edge right on the edge of that plate. Now we want to pin the bottom edge of the bag together, blank side to blank side. And what we're going to be doing is the cross pinning technique that we learned in class, where we're starting at the corner, skewering through with the pin, matching corner to corner, and pinning on the line, pinning line to line, all the way across, just on the bottom of the bag. Now that you're pinned on the line, you're going to do the cross pinning part of it, pinning perpendicular, placing the pins right on the line, and pulling out the original pins. So we're going to stitch this bottom edge, the bottom edges of the muslin together, right on that seam line, stitching from the very edge of the bag, back stitching with a size 3 stitch from one end to the other. Taking your pins out before you get to them. So we're going to press this seam. First we're going to press it flat. I'm going to use a little steam pressure, and then we're going to press it open. Press it open so we open out both sides of the bag and press the seam open with the point of the iron pointing right down the center of the seam. Now you're ready to cut out your fashion fabric. You're going to lay your fabric on the table with the wrong side facing up and the selvage next to you. And just smooth it out. It's already been ironed, but smooth it out. And then you're going to lay your muslin piece that you've cut out and sewn with the markings facing up. Lay that out onto the fashion fabric. And we're going to do what we did when we were cutting out the muslin. We're going to make sure that this muslin piece is on the straight of grain of the fashion fabric. And we're going to do this the same way by measuring from this straight of grain line to the selvage edge on the fabric. So in this case, this line is up here at the top of the line is 11 1/4 inches from the selvage, and so I want it to be 11 1/4 here at the bottom of the line as well. And once it is, that'll tell me that it's on the straight of grain. And I'll pin that through all the layers into the table. Then what I'm going to do is smooth the muslin piece out and begin my pinning. To pin these two layers together, the muslin to the fashion fabric, we're going to sort of smooth from the center line or the straight of grain line to the outer edge and pin the two layers together with the pin points pointing straight out within the seam allowance. Pinning into both layers and out of both layers using a similar technique to how I pinned the pattern to the muslin at the beginning of the tote bag process. And I'm putting my pins about every 2 to 3 inches away from each other. Now that the muslin is pinned to the fashion fabric, we're going to cut around the perimeter of the muslin all the way around. And again, when you're cutting, you want to keep the bottom of the scissors against the table, and you don't want to lift up the fabric. The more you move the fabric, the more inaccurate it will all be. So you want to keep it pretty flat. Okay. So before we go to the sewing machine to sew the two layers of fabric together, the muslin to the exterior fabric, we want to choose a thread that matches the exterior fabric. And the way that we do that is by laying out one thread onto the fabric. And I'm trying 3 different threads to see which one is the best one. I'm trying a dark blue, a medium blue, and a black. And what I'm going for is that the thread will, in essence, disappear into the fabric so that we don't see it at all. And in this case, even though this is a blue fabric, it looks like the black thread is the one that disappears. So I'm going to choose black thread. So the next step is to sew your 2 layers of fabric together, your muslin to your exterior fabric. And this is considered a temporary stitch, even though we'll probably never take it out. So you want your stitch to be on the largest stitch on the machine, which is at a size 5. So you want to lower the stitch length knob all the way to the 5. You want your zigzag to be at 0, or your stitch width to be at 0, because you want to be on a straight stitch rather than a zigzag. What we're going to be doing is sewing from edge to edge without back stitching, and sewing right along the edge of the fabric, laying the edge of the presser foot along the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and you can see that I'm just laying the presser foot right along the edge of the fabric, pulling my pins out as I go. And then when I get to the edge, I'm just going to come right to the edge, raise my needle and my presser foot, and clip my threads right at the fabric. So no back stitching and no turning corners. Then when I get to the indentations, I will turn a corner there. So again, the presser foot is right at the edge of the fabric, so that the needle or the stitch line is at a 1/4 inch from the edge. And then you'll do that all the way around, sewing right from edge to edge, no back stitching. The next step is to overlock all the long sides of your tote bag, making sure that the two edges are even, cutting off any excess along the edge. The only part of the tote bag that you won't overlock at this point is the indentation along the side.